Hello P6. For today's comprehension activity we are going to be reading together a story called Rosie and the Boredom Eater. So if you haven't yet done so, please go now to the literacy page, download Rosie and the Boredom Eater comprehension, and then whenever you're ready we'll read it through together. Rosie and the Boredom Eater. Rosie Barker was bored, as usual. She had been bored ever since the Barkers had moved house. The old house had had a garden. The one they had moved to had only a cobbled yard. None of the houses in Latimer Street had a garden. "I'm bored," Rosie told her mother. "Why can't we have a garden?" "Because," replied Mrs. Barker. "That's not a proper answer," Rosie told her. "It's the only one there is, and you can be bored when you do have a garden, as well as when you haven't." "At least there's company in a garden," said Rosie. "Birds and snails and centipedes and worms and things." "I must say, Rosie," said her mother, "that I have never noticed you playing much with worms." "At least they're alive," said Rosie obstinately. "They're company. They wriggle about." "Oh, do stop going on about worms." Mr. Barker came in. "What's all this about worms?" he asked. "Oh, she reckons she wants some to play with. She says she's bored." "She always is," he said. "Why don't you go out, Rosie? Find some kids to play with. Make some friends." "If I'd got any brothers and sisters, I wouldn't have to," said Rosie. Mrs. Barker sighed. "Here we go again." "It ought to be against the law to only have one child," Rosie told them. "There ought to be no such things as onlys. It's cruelty to children." "There's no point in going over all that again, Rosie," her mother told her. "I fought cat and dog with my brother and sister," Mr. Barker said. "At least if you're fighting, you're not bored," said Rosie. "Listen," said Mrs. Barker. "I don't want to hear that word again today. Do you hear me, Rosie?" "What word? Bored? You mean you don't want to hear the word bored again? Or do you mean some other word besides bored? You mean you're bored with—" "Rosie!" Mr. Barker warned her. "I'm going out," said Rosie, "to find a friend." She went out the back door and banged it behind her. She went across the little cobbled yard and through the gate that led to the back alley. She looked left and right. She saw only the blank windows of terraced houses and rows of chimney pots. Even they were lifeless, with not so much as a puff of smoke. "Where is everybody?" she wondered. Rosie knew that the house next door to hers was empty. She also knew that her parents would not approve of her nosing around it. She did it just the same. It was the only thing she could think of to do. "And if I don't do something soon, I might actually die of boredom," she told herself. "Here lies the body of Rosie Barker, aged 9, died of boredom." She lifted the latch of the back gate of number 27 and pushed. It swung slowly open, with the kind of creak you get in a horror film. Rosie went in and shut the gate behind her. She looked around. As far as she could see, the yard of number 27 was identical to the yard of number 25. Nobody there, No birds, no worms. Just a dustbin. Boring, 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 she said out loud. I might as well be sitting in that dustbin with the lid on. She stared at the bin. She knew it was empty because the people next door had moved out weeks ago. It actually occurred to her that to climb inside it and pull the lid on after her might be quite an interesting and unusual thing to do. At least it wouldn't be boring. Then the dustbin moved. It didn't move forward or backward. It just rocked ever so slightly. Now I'm seeing things, said Rosie. She knew, of course, that dustbins don't move. They just stand around, waiting to be filled with rubbish. The dustbin moved again. This time, Rosie was sure she hadn't imagined it. She stood and boggled. Again, the dustbin rocked. Rosie cleared her throat. Is there anybody there? She asked. There was no reply. Rosie felt extremely silly, standing there talking to a dustbin. Stupid old bin, she muttered. Then the dustbin really took off. It began to rock violently, back and forth, back and forth. It was as if there were someone inside there, working it to and fro. It rocked so wildly that its lid began to rattle and threatened to fly right off. Not an earthquake, thought Rosie Barker. Nothing else is jumping. I'm going mad. That's what it is. I've gone mad with boredom. At that moment, the dustbin lid did fly off. It dropped to the cobbles with a clatter. The bin stopped rocking. Silence. The thing to do now, thought Rosie, is to go and see if there's anyone or anything inside. Somehow she did not feel much like doing this. Just tiptoe up, she told herself. Really pussyfoot up so that whatever it is won't hear. This is what she did. Slowly, slowly, she tiptoed forward. It was like playing grandmother's footsteps by herself. The dustbin was stock still now, stiff and ordinary as any other dustbin. She was nearly there now. Nearly, nearly. Rosie screamed and nearly jumped out of her skin. There was somebody in the dustbin. Oh! Quavered Rosie Barker. Help! What do you mean, help? The voice was high and cracked. What do you think I'm here for? Rosie gasped. She craned forward. All she could see was a pair of skinny hands that seemed to be clasped over a tangle of grey hair. An old man must be hunched up in there. It was impossible. She knew it. Nobody's grandfather that she knew went hiding themselves in dustbins, all hunched up. Well, the voice snapped. And at the same time, the skinny hands flew up. And all at once, there was a face in the dustbin. Rosie Barker boggled. She boggled till her eyes nearly popped out. She was looking at the oldest, wickedest face you had ever seen. Chalky white and powdery looking. Round it flew a halo of grey hair and beard, all tangled with cobwebs and dust. Good morning, said Rosie. She said it with extreme politeness. She did not know whether whoever it was had any toes. If it had, she didn't want to tread on them. No reply. She was being watched by black, beady eyes. Who are you? She was not sure what she expected him to say. Certainly she did not expect him to say, I'm your long-lost Uncle Arthur from Australia. She did not even have a long-lost Uncle Arthur, as far as she knew. The Boredom Eater. The hoarse whisper ran echoing about the bin. Boredom Eater? Echoed Rosie blankly. Boredom Eater. So now that we've read the story through once together, I'd like you to go and read it one more time. You could read it out loud to an adult at home using your downloaded copy, or you can listen back through the video one more time. Either way, make sure you read through the story at least one more time and then go to the next video, and in the next video I'll explain to you what your tasks are for this week.